landscape. I have a vivid fourth grade memory of sitting in the second row near the back of the classroom, and hanging on the wall underneath the American flag and next to the pencil sharpener was a pull-down map of the United States. It was vintage and from the 50s, and it hung there for decades before me. I tried to find that map in my life to be able to show you, and I would just like to have it, but I have not yet found it in my life. So, but this is a sort of a version of it. Each state was a different color. Idaho was salmon pink, Arizona was a mint green, and I must have stared at it for hours every day. I hadn't really traveled too far from my Indiana home, and I especially wanted to go visit those states because they were my favorite colors. And I like to think, I actually like to think of Idaho being actually salmon pink and Arizona being mint green, and how great it would be to go and see those colors. So, and I've always had a strange love of maps, and I have a pretty decent collection of them. And I also have what a friend of mine once referred to as a slightly alarming amount of vintage metal globes. And I actually think, here's my kitchen table, I actually think this is where a lot of my palette as an artist comes from in painting, but also the early connection to the landscape as well. So going back as a child, my world was small and organized on a grid. My parents' house was in the newer section of the town, and they lived in a 3-bedroom, 2-bath brick ranch on a 1/4 acre of land, surrounded by 200 houses with the exact same proportions, materials, and one of 3 floor plans. Every house had the same semi-arc pathway from front door to driveway, with meticulous shrubbery running the length of it. There may have been slight variances like shutter colors or door colors or impatiens over geraniums, but for the most part there was a uniformity and a sameness about the neighborhood that I grew up in that really felt like security to me as a child. I could walk into a friend's house down the street and know where everything was because it was the same as my house. This is a still from the 1991 movie Edward Scissorhands, and I love Tim Burton's portrayal of the suburban neighborhood, partially because it was similar to my experience in some aspects. And also, at the edge of the subdivision I lived in was untouched and underdeveloped land. There were some wooded areas, open fields, an old farm, and it was as a kid, a great balance of having the neighborhood childhood experience, but also it was butted up like right against what I used to think of as the open wild, where it was probably not as wild as I remember, but where you could just run free and everything was filled with possibility. And my grandparents lived in the same town, but they lived in another development a few miles away that was built about 25 years before that. My grandfather was a World War II vet and took advantage of the interest-free mortgages given to vets after the war, and so it created a huge boom for middle-income housing, especially in that area. And I think there's a post-war idealism that my grandparents desperately wanted to be a part of. Get married, have 2 children, and just fit in with the neighbors. Coming out of the war, there was a lot of devastation, particularly for my grandfather, and I think he was just trying to bury all that into a new way of life that was aiming for the ideal. And it was kind of a forced, naive optimism that was barely masking a lot underneath. And so by the time I was born, suburbia had spread there to an even greater degree, quickly eating up the natural landscape acre by acre. This is a quote that I found from the book Suburban Escape, and the writer Lucy Picard states that suburbia became the scapegoat for the shortcomings of society. The very character of characterlessness was introduced into art about the suburbs. The American landscape was changing, and it was changing at a very rapid rate. 75% of the construction in the United States in the last 30 years is due to suburban development. So without any notion